The hunting pack moved through the twisted vegetation of Sector 7 like living shadows, their thermal signatures masked by military-grade suppressors. 12 of the galaxy's finest predators, each representing a species that had perfected the art of death over millennia. I watched them from my concealed position, my mandibles clicking softly in what might have been anticipation or perhaps amusement. Hard to tell anymore, after 40 cycles of observing humans. Commander Vask led the formation, his scaled hide rippling with barely contained aggression. A Corthan apex hunter, 400 pounds of muscle and razor-edged claws. Behind him prowled the others, a Sistari venom specialist, 2 Greln pack coordinators with their neural-linked combat suits, and 8 more killers whose reputations alone had ended conflicts on 17 worlds. They were hunting a human child, a 6-year-old female named Emma Hartford, who had wandered from the research colony 3 hours ago. What these fools didn't know. The thing they should have checked before accepting this contract from the Meridian Syndicate. Humans don't travel alone. Not ever, not even their children. Thermal readings confirm the target ahead. Vask hissed into the comm network, his translator chip rendering his native clicking into something resembling Galactic standard. 50 meters. She stopped moving, probably exhausted. This will be quick. I could have warned them. Should have, really, according to about 15 different galactic protocols regarding interspecies cooperation and the sanctity of sentient life. But where would be the fun in that? Besides, I'd submitted my reports about human-companion bonding patterns 17 times to the Galactic Council. 17 times they dismissed my findings as anthropomorphized speculation and statistical anomalies. They were about to learn otherwise. The hunting pack spread into a perfect encirclement pattern, each member taking position with the kind of precision that came from thousands of successful kills. Vask raised his primary weapon, a plasma caster capable of dropping a charging wreck beast at 200 paces. Overkill for a human child, but the Meridian Syndicate had paid for confirmation, not capture. The girl's parents had something the Syndicate wanted, some classified research data, and apparently leverage came in small, terrified packages. Emma sat on a fallen log, her small form barely visible in the dying light of Kepler 442b's twin suns. She was crying, her shoulders shaking, face buried in her hands. The perfect picture of helplessness, the ideal prey. Vask's finger tightened on the trigger. That's when I saw it. Just a flicker of movement in the underbrush, about 3 meters to the girl's left. Something low to the ground, compact, moving with the kind of deliberate purpose that made my survival instincts scream warnings my higher brain functions chose to ignore. Because again, where would be the fun in, running? Target acquired, Vask announced. Eliminating in 3, 2... The honey badger emerged from the vegetation like a missile made of fur and fury. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with Earth fauna, let me provide some context. A honey badger, known scientifically as Mellivora capensis, masses approximately 9 to 16 kilograms. Compared to Vask's 400 pounds, this should have been laughable, a minor inconvenience, a speed bump on the road to a successful assassination. Except honey badgers don't care about your expectations. They don't care about anything. The creature hit the nearest ground coordinator at full sprint, its jaws clamping onto the hunter's throat before anyone could react. The Greln's scream cut off in a wet gurgle as the badger's teeth, designed to crack open the shells of tortoises and the hives of African bees, shredded through combat armor rated to withstand small arms fire. Purple blood sprayed across the forest floor in an arc that would have been beautiful if it wasn't so horrifying. "Contact!" someone shouted, their voice cracking with panic. "We have contact! Unknown hostile!" The badger released the dying Greln and pivoted toward the Sistari venom specialist with movements too fast for something that's squat and muscular. The Sistari managed to deploy her toxin sacs, spraying a neurotoxin capable of paralyzing a Corthan in under 5 seconds. The badger ran through the cloud like it was morning mist, its loose skin allowing the venom to slide off without penetrating. It latched onto the Sistari's leg and began climbing, its claws finding purchase in scales that had evolved to deflect blade strikes. The Sistari's shrieks reached frequencies I didn't know biological vocal cords could produce. Vask finally opened fire, his plasma caster illuminating the darkening forest with strobes of blue-white energy. The first shot missed the badger by centimeters, vaporizing a tree trunk. The second shot hit one of his own team members, a Threxian scout who had made the fatal mistake of being between the commander and his target. The third shot actually connected with the badger, catching it in the hindquarters with enough energy to melt steel. The badger stumbled, its fur smoking. Then it turned to look at Vask with eyes that held absolutely zero fear and an infinite capacity for grudges. "Oh no," I muttered from my hiding spot, my translator glitching on the human expression I'd learned during my research tenure. "Oh no, no, no," the badger charged. Vask, to his credit, didn't run. 400 pounds of apex predator held his ground and met the charge with claws extended, roaring a challenge that echoed through the forest. He was faster than the badger, stronger, better armed, and backed by thousands of generations of evolutionary optimization for combat. None of that mattered. The badger went low, under Vask's swipe, and latched onto his primary leg with the tenacity of a creature that had once been documented fighting off 6 lions over a kill. Its teeth found the joint where armor plating met flexible material, and it began to chew. Not bite, chew, like it had all the time in the world and nowhere else to be. Vask tried to shake it off, tried to crush it against the ground, tried to tear it away with his claws. The badger's loose skin allowed it to twist within its own hide, avoiding lethal strikes while maintaining its death grip. Blood, bright orange Corthan blood, began to pool beneath them. The remaining hunters finally organized a response. The second Grelm coordinator opened fire with a kinetic weapon, the projectiles tearing through foliage and slamming into the struggling pair. Several rounds hit Vask. One might have hit the badger. Impossible to tell, really, given how thoroughly they were entangled. Emma Hartford, the human child they'd come to kill, had stopped crying. She sat on her log, watching the carnage with the kind of detached calm that only a species that had domesticated wolves and befriended apex predators could manage. She made a soft clicking sound with her tongue. The badger paused in its dismantling of Vask's leg, looked up at her, then returned to its work with renewed vigor. "She's controlling it," the surviving Sistari gasped, her leg a ruined mess but her venom sac still functional. "The human child is directing the creature." Not quite accurate, but close enough. The truth was more complex and somehow more terrifying. Humans didn't control animals like some kind of psychic puppet masters. They formed bonds, partnerships, friendships, if you believe the sentimental research papers. This badger had probably been hand-raised by Emma's parents at the research colony, fed scraps from their table, scratched behind its ears, and generally treated like a member of the family despite being one of Earth's most formidable small predators. And now, it was protecting its family. 3 more hunters went down in the next minute. One got too close and received a face full of claws that turned his visual sensors into abstract art. Another tried a flanking maneuver and discovered that badgers could climb. The third simply made eye contact with the creature and apparently decided that surrender was a valid survival strategy, throwing down his weapons and backing away slowly. Smart move, actually. Vask finally managed to dislodge the badger by sacrificing his secondary arm, letting the creature's jaws close on the limb while he used his primary claws to rake across its exposed belly. The strike would have disemboweled most creatures. The badger's skin was too thick, too loose, and it simply rolled with the impact before launching itself at Vask's throat. They went down together in a thrashing heap of scales and fur. When they separated 10 seconds later, Vask was missing his throat, and the badger was missing its left ear. Both injuries were bleeding. Only one of them was fatal. The badger sat down next to Vask's cooling corpse, licked its paw, and began grooming itself as if orchestrating the violent deaths of 12 trained killers was just another day's work. Which, given what I knew about honey badgers, it probably was. Emma walked over to the creature, her small human feet making barely a sound on the forest floor. She knelt next to it, careful to avoid the pools of multicolored blood, and gently scratched the badger behind its remaining ear. "Good boy, Biscuit," she said softly. "You're such a good boy." Biscuit. The creature's name was Biscuit. A honey badger that had just systematically dismantled a kill team of Galactic hunters was named after a baked good. The absurdity would have been funny if I wasn't so busy documenting everything for my report. A report, I noted with grim satisfaction, that the Galactic Council would definitely not dismiss this time. The surviving hunters, all 3 of them, had formed a defensive cluster about 30 meters away. They looked like they were having a heated discussion about whether honor required them to continue the mission or whether survival instincts should take precedence. I could have told them that Biscuit was currently occupied and unlikely to pursue unless provoked. I could have. Didn't. The lead survivor, a Threxian with more scars than sense, apparently decided that partial mission completion was better than none. He raised his weapon toward Emma, his targeting laser painting a red dot on her small chest. Biscuit stopped grooming. His head swiveled toward the Threxian with mechanical precision. The hunter's hand trembled. "Retreat," he finally said, lowering his weapon. "Retreat now. This contract is void." They ran. Actually ran, the supposedly elite hunters, crashing through the underbrush like terrified prey animals. I tracked their thermal signatures until they disappeared beyond my scanner range, heading back toward whatever ship had brought them to this world. Emma stood up, brushing dirt from her clothes with the fastidiousness of a child who knew she'd get in trouble for getting messy. Biscuit waddled after her, keeping pace with her small steps, his eyes scanning the perimeter for additional threats. They walked deeper into the forest, following what I assumed was a familiar path back to the research colony. I gave them a 10-minute head start before following at a discreet distance. My job was observation, not interference, though the line between those 2 categories had gotten increasingly blurry over the years. The colony appeared through the trees after about 20 minutes of walking, a cluster of prefab structures surrounded by defensive barriers that were laughably inadequate by military standards, but perfectly functional for keeping out local wildlife. Emma's parents met her at the perimeter gate, Dr. Marcus Hartford and Dr. Lisa Hartford, xenobiology specialists who had been studying Kepler 442b's ecosystem for the past 3 years. They swept their daughter into their arms, with a kind of relief that suggested they'd been searching frantically. "Where were you?" Marcus demanded, his voice tight with emotion. "We've been looking everywhere." "I got lost," Emma said simply, "but Biscuit found me." Lisa noticed the blood matting Biscuit's fur, her experienced eyes immediately cataloging the injuries. "What happened? Did you run into predators?" "Some people were being mean," Emma replied with the perfect honesty of young children. "Biscuit made them go away." I watched Marcus examine Biscuit more closely, his expression shifting from concern to confusion to something approaching horror as he noticed the types of blood staining the badger's coat. Corthan orange, Sistari purple, Grelm blue, the color palette of a slaughter. "Lisa," he said quietly, "call colony security. Tell them we need a sweep of Sector 7 and get Admiral Petrov on the comm. I think we might have had another incident." Another incident. The words hung in the air like a confession. This wasn't the first time, then. Not the first time someone had made the mistake of threatening a human in proximity to their companion animals. Not the first time Earth's fauna had demonstrated why humanity's homeworld had the highest predator-to-prey ratio of any garden planet in the known galaxy. I transmitted my preliminary report to the Galactic Council as the Hartford family disappeared into their habitat, Biscuit trotting alongside them like a loyal dog, despite being infinitely more dangerous than any canine ever domesticated. The report included full video documentation, thermal analysis, and trajectory modeling of the combat encounter. 17 previous reports about human bonding behaviors had been dismissed. This one, I suspected, would start a very different conversation. Because the Meridian Syndicate hadn't sent 12 hunters after a human child on a whim. They'd studied the target, assessed the risks, and calculated the odds of success. What they'd failed to account for was the single most important variable in any equation involving humans. Humans don't exist in isolation. They form connections, build relationships, create families that extend beyond genetic bonds to include creatures from across the evolutionary spectrum. A honey badger named Biscuit had just taught the galaxy's most feared hunters a lesson that should have been obvious from humanity's own history. Any species that could domesticate wolves, befriend ravens, train eagles, and coexist with animals that killed them regularly wasn't a species that should be threatened through its children, because humans protect their own. And their companions? Well, Biscuit had made that point rather emphatically. I settled into my observation post for the night, my recording equipment humming softly as it processed the day's data. Tomorrow, I'd need to survey Sector 7, document the bodies, collect tissue samples for the inevitable inquiry. But tonight, I had a front row seat to watch Emma Hartford through the habitat windows as she carefully cleaned Biscuit's wounds, her small hands gentle on fur stained with the blood of beings who'd tried to hurt her. The badger tolerated her ministrations with the patience of a creature that knew itself to be absolutely invincible, occasionally licking her face when she got too close. When she finished, Emma wrapped a small bandage around Biscuit's remaining ear, the bright pink material absurdly cheerful against his battle-scarred hide. "There," she said, patting his head. "All better." Biscuit made a soft chirping sound, nuzzled her hand, then waddled over to a small bed in the corner and curled up for sleep. Within minutes, he was snoring, his body relaxed in the way only a creature with absolutely no natural predators could manage. Emma's parents tucked her into bed an hour later, their expressions still tight with worry but softening as they kissed her good night. Marcus paused at the door, looking back at Biscuit's sleeping form. "We should probably increase security," he murmured to Lisa. "Or," Lisa replied, glancing at the badger, "we could just let everyone know that Emma has a very protective pet." "That's not standard protocol for colony defense." "No, but it's effective." They left, the lights dimming to nighttime levels. I continued my observations, watching the habitat settle into quiet darkness, punctuated only by Biscuit's occasional snores and the soft hum of life support systems. My comm unit chimed softly. Incoming message from the Galactic Council, flagged Priority 1. I opened it, already knowing what it would say. "Observer Krell," the text read. "Your recent report has been received and is being reviewed by the Security Committee. Please maintain surveillance and await further instructions. Under no circumstances are you to interfere with the subjects or alert them to Council interest in this matter." I sent back a brief acknowledgement and settled in for a long night of observation. The Council's interest, I suspected, had less to do with concern for human welfare and more to do with the strategic implications of a species whose children traveled with combat-capable companions. The Meridian Syndicate would need to be handled, their contract on the Hartford family nullified, their assets frozen pending investigation, and somewhere, in offices and command centers across the galaxy, military planners would be recalculating their threat assessments for humanity, adding new variables to their equations, accounting for the fact that humans didn't just fight with weapons and technology, but with creatures they'd befriended, domesticated, and trained. Creatures like honey badgers, who apparently had zero concept of proportional response and infinite reserves of righteous fury when their humans were threatened. I watched Emma sleep, her small form peaceful under warm blankets, one hand trailing off the bed to where Biscuit slept on the floor. Her fingers rested gently on his head, a connection maintained even in sleep. The badger's ear twitched slightly at her touch, but he didn't wake, secure in the knowledge that his human was safe. Tomorrow would bring investigations, inquiries, and probably several diplomatic incidents. The Meridian Syndicate wouldn't take the loss of an entire hunter pack lightly, and the Galactic Council would need to address the larger implications of what had happened here. But tonight, a 6-year-old human girl slept soundly, protected by 9 kilograms of fur and fury that had carved a path through 12 of the galaxy's finest predators without breaking stride. The galaxy, I reflected, had absolutely no idea what it was dealing with when it came to humanity, and I, for one, couldn't wait to watch them figure it out. The investigation team arrived at dawn, descending from orbit in a Council enforcement cruiser that made the research colony's defensive systems look like children's toys. I watched from my concealed position as 12 officials in pressed uniforms marched through the perimeter gate, led by Investigator Thorne, a Valasian known for her ruthless efficiency and complete inability to understand the concept of humor. Perfect. Dr. Marcus Hartford met them at the main habitat, his expression carefully neutral. Behind him, I could see Lisa holding Emma's hand while Biscuit sat between them, groomed and bandaged, but radiating the same casual menace as before. The badger appeared to be eating something. Upon closer inspection with my long-range optics, I realized it was a nutritional bar. A human nutritional bar, which he was consuming wrapper and all. Nobody seemed concerned about this. "Dr. Hartford," Thorne began, her translator rendering her clicking speech into crisp Galactic standard. "I am here to investigate the incident in Sector 7. 12 licensed contractors were found deceased, displaying injuries consistent with animal attack. Your daughter was reportedly in the area at the time." "My daughter was attacked by assassins," Marcus corrected, his voice carrying an edge that suggested sleep deprivation and rapidly depleting patience. "She defended herself." Thorne's head tilted in what might have been confusion. "The report indicates a Mellivora capensis was responsible for the casualties. Your daughter is 6 years old and masses approximately 20 kilograms. Please explain this discrepancy." Emma tugged on her mother's hand. Lisa bent down, and the child whispered something in her ear. Lisa's expression remained carefully blank as she straightened. Emma would like Investigator Thorne to know that Biscuit doesn't like being called by his scientific name. He prefers Biscuit. The badger made a soft huffing sound that could have been agreement or indigestion. Hard to tell. Thorne consulted her datapad, swiping through what I assumed were preliminary forensic reports. "I need to understand the sequence of events. 12 trained operatives, equipped with military-grade weapons and armor, were neutralized by a single animal massing less than 16 kilograms. The probability of this outcome is statistically negligible." "You're calculating wrong," Marcus said flatly. "You're treating Biscuit like a random wildlife encounter. He's not. He's family. Emotional attachment does not alter biological limitations. With humans, it absolutely does." One of Thorne's assistants, a younger Valasian with less rigid posture, stepped forward nervously. "Investigator, the xenobiology database has several thousand documented cases of humans forming symbiotic bonds with predatory species. In 73% of documented conflicts, human-bonded animals displayed combat effectiveness exceeding their baseline species parameters by factors ranging from 200 to 800%. Thorne's mandibles clicked in irritation. "That data has been disputed by the Scientific Consensus Committee." "The bodies in Sector 7 aren't disputed," I muttered from my hiding spot, recording everything. The assistant was right, of course. I'd written half those reports myself, watching humans interact with everything from Earth dogs to Centauri cliff stalkers to Andromedan phase cats. The pattern was consistent. Bonded animals fought harder, smarter, and with absolutely zero regard for conventional threat assessment when protecting their humans. Emma apparently got bored with the adult conversation. She walked over to one of the investigation team members, a Greln similar to the ones Biscuit had dispatched yesterday, and tugged on his equipment harness. "Do you have any cookies?" she asked politely. The Greln froze, his 3 eyes swiveling to look at the small human child, then at the honey badger that had stopped eating its wrapper to watch this interaction with focused intensity. No, I do not carry confections during official duties. Oh, okay. Emma wandered back to her mother, seemingly unbothered. Biscuit returned to his wrapper, satisfied that no threat had materialized. The Grelm looked like he might need medical attention despite the complete absence of actual danger. Thorn pulled up a holographic display showing the Sector 7 site, bodies highlighted in red, weapons trajectories in blue, blood spatter analysis in sickly green. It painted a picture of absolute chaos, the kind of combat forensics usually reserved for battlefields, not encounters with wildlife. The Korthan commander sustained catastrophic damage to his throat, primary leg, and secondary arm. Cause of death: exsanguination and airway compromise. 3 other casualties displayed similar wound patterns. 2 died from venom exposure after the Sistari specialist's sacs ruptured during the attack. 1 was killed by friendly fire from the commander's plasma caster. The remaining 5 sustained fatal injuries consistent with claw and bite trauma from a relatively small predator. Marcus crossed his arms. Are you questioning whether my daughter's companion is capable of self-defense? Or are you questioning why 12 armed operatives attacked a child in the first place? I am establishing facts for my report. Let me establish some facts for you then. The Meridian Syndicate put a contract on my family because we refused to hand over our research data. They sent hunters after my 6-year-old daughter. Biscuit protected her. That's the entire sequence of events. Thorn's expression, already difficult to read given Valasian facial structure, became completely opaque. Your research into Kepler 442b's microbiome has significant commercial applications. The Syndicate believed they had legal claim to your findings based on disputed contract language. So they decided to murder a child to motivate me. That's their dispute resolution strategy? I am not defending their methods. I am explaining context. Here's some context, Lisa interjected, her voice sharp enough to cut atmosphere. Every species in the Galactic Council has some version of laws protecting children, every single one. But humans? We don't just write laws. We bond with creatures specifically bred over thousands of years to protect our families. Wolves became dogs. Wildcats became house cats. And honey badgers? She gestured at Biscuit, who was now attempting to open a storage container with single-minded determination. Honey badgers became Biscuit. The storage container yielded to Biscuit's persistent clawing. He extracted what appeared to be a bag of dried fruit, tore it open, and began eating contentedly, scattering debris across the floor. He wasn't bred, Thorn pointed out. Mellivora capensis is not a domesticated species. No, Marcus agreed. He's a rescued animal. Emma found him as a kit 3 years ago, injured by local predators. We nursed him back to health. He never left. Turns out honey badgers imprint on caretakers, and when that caretaker is a 3-year-old human who feeds you and names you after her favorite food, you develop certain protective instincts. I watched through my scopes as Thorn processed this information, her datapad updating with new variables. She was good at her job, methodical and thorough, but she was missing the essential point that I'd been trying to communicate to the Council for 40 cycles. Humans don't follow normal rules. They take predators and make them family. They look at creatures that could kill them and see potential friends. They domesticated fire, for crying out loud, the one element every other species learned to fear and avoid. Expecting humans to conform to standard threat response patterns was like expecting a supernova to politely dim itself because it was bothering the neighbors. I need to examine the animal, Thorn announced. Medical scans, behavioral assessment, threat evaluation. Emma looked up at her mother. Lisa's expression suggested she had several opinions about this request, none of them suitable for diplomatic discourse. Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder. You can try, he said carefully. But Biscuit doesn't like strangers, especially strangers with weapons. My team is unarmed per Council protocol for civilian investigation. You're wearing armor. He considers that hostile. Thorn approached Biscuit with the confidence of someone who had conducted thousands of xenobiological assessments, and never encountered anything her training hadn't prepared her for. She activated a handheld scanner, pointing it at the badger while maintaining what she probably thought was a safe distance of 3 meters. Biscuit stopped eating his stolen dried fruit. His head swiveled toward Thorn with the kind of deliberate focus that made my survival instincts scream warnings across the communication gap. The badger's lips pulled back slightly, revealing teeth that had punched through military-grade combat armor less than 24 hours ago. "Fascinating," Thorn murmured, adjusting her scanner settings. Elevated adrenaline levels, increased heart rate, muscular tension consistent with pre-combat posture. The creature is preparing to attack despite no overt threat. "You're pointing something at him," Emma said helpfully. "He thinks you're being rude. It is a passive scanning device. It cannot harm him. He doesn't know that. He just knows you're pointing something." Thorn lowered the scanner. Biscuit's posture relaxed marginally, though his eyes never left the investigator. The message was clear. Tolerance had limits, and those limits were rapidly approaching. One of Thorn's assistants, the nervous one who'd mentioned the database earlier, cleared his throat. "Investigator, perhaps we could conduct the examination remotely. The Hartford family could provide biological samples and behavioral data without requiring direct interaction." Sensible suggestion. Thorn ignored it. "I need baseline aggression metrics. Standard protocol requires direct observation of threat response." She pulled a small object from her equipment harness, a standard-issue emergency ration bar in sealed packaging. "I will attempt to establish non-threatening contact through food offering." "That's really not a good idea," Marcus started to say, but Thorn was already moving forward, extending the ration bar toward Biscuit with the kind of slow, deliberate movements prey animals used when trying not to trigger predator chase instincts. Biscuit took the ration bar. Then he took Thorn's hand. Not violently. Not with the same explosive aggression he displayed against the hunters. This was almost gentle, his jaws closing around her wrist with just enough pressure to demonstrate capability without breaking skin. Thorn froze, her entire body going rigid as every self-preservation instinct she possessed finally caught up with her academic curiosity. "Release," she commanded, her voice remarkably steady given the circumstances. Biscuit maintained his grip, his eyes fixed on hers. The ration bar lay forgotten, on the ground between them. This wasn't about food. This was about establishing dominance, making a point, demonstrating exactly who was in control of this interaction. Emma walked over, completely unconcerned, and tapped Biscuit on his nose. "Let go, Biscuit. She's just confused. She doesn't understand proper manners yet." The badger released Thorn's wrist and returned to his dried fruit, the incident apparently already forgotten. Thorn stared at her hand, which bore clear impressions from Biscuit's teeth but no actual wounds, then at Emma, then back at her hand. "The creature demonstrated significant bite pressure control," she said faintly. "Estimated force sufficient to fracture Valesian bone structure, but applied with precision to avoid tissue damage." "He's not a creature," Emma corrected, using the same patient tone human children employed when explaining obvious facts to slow adults. "He's Biscuit, and he was being nice because I asked him to." The investigation team exchanged glances that suggested collective reassessment of everything they thought they knew about human-animal bonding. I increased my recording resolution, knowing this footage would circulate through council chambers for years, probably becoming required viewing for xenobiology students. Thorn spent the next hour conducting her examination from a respectful distance, using remote sensors and analyzing data Marcus provided from their colony medical bay. The results painted a picture of an animal operating well above baseline parameters. Enhanced muscle density from regular protein-rich diet, improved reflexes from constant interaction with a mobile human child, and stress hormone levels that suggested absolute confidence in his territorial security. "The bond appears to be neurologically mediated," Thorn concluded, reviewing brain scan data. "The animal's threat response is modulated by proximity to the human child. When separated, standard aggression patterns emerge. When together, the animal displays protective behavior that overrides individual survival instincts." We could have told you that without the brain scans, Lisa muttered. Scientific confirmation requires empirical data. Scientific confirmation required 12 bodies yesterday. Thorne didn't respond to that, which I interpreted as tacit acknowledgement. Her report was taking shape. I could see it in the way she organized her data files, compiling evidence into a narrative that would support specific conclusions. The Meridian Syndicate had violated approximately 47 different council statutes by targeting a human child. The hunters had died as a direct result of their illegal contract, and humanity's tendency to form combat partnerships with predatory species represented a significant variable in future conflict assessment. All conclusions I'd reached 40 cycles ago, but better late than never. The investigation wrapped up by midday, Thorne's team departing with enough data to fill several archives and probably traumatize an entire generation of council bureaucrats. As their shuttle lifted off, Marcus let out a long breath. That could have gone worse, he said. They tried to scan Biscuit like he was a laboratory specimen, Lisa countered. That's pretty close to worst case. They could have tried to confiscate him. Both parents looked at their daughter, who was currently sprawled on the floor using Biscuit as a pillow while reading a book about dinosaurs. The badger tolerated this with the patience of a creature that had long ago accepted his role as furniture, occasionally shifting to get more comfortable, but never dislodging his small human. Anyone who tried to separate them would need more than 12 hunters, Lisa said quietly. She wasn't wrong. I transmitted my final observations to the council, appending them to Thorne's official report with my own analysis. The incident would have ripple effects across the galaxy, forcing recalculation of human threat assessments, updating first contact protocols, and probably spawning several new academic disciplines focused on interspecies bonding dynamics. But the real lesson, the one that would take the council decades to fully internalize, was simpler than all that academic analysis. Humans protect their own. They form bonds that transcend species barriers, create families from the most unlikely combinations, and when threatened, they don't fight alone. They fight with creatures they've loved, fed, and named after baked goods. And those creatures, well, Biscuit had demonstrated quite thoroughly what happens when you threaten a human child who happens to have a honey badger for a best friend. 3 weeks later, I received notice that my research contract had been extended indefinitely. The council wanted long-term observation of the Hartford family, detailed documentation of human-animal bonding patterns, and recommendations for updating interspecies contact protocols. They'd finally accepted what I'd been telling them for 40 cycles. Humans were different. Not better, not worse, just fundamentally operating on a different set of rules than every other spacefaring species. They took hostile environments and called them home. They looked at apex predators and saw potential companions. They bonded with creatures that should terrify them and built families that defied conventional biological categorization. And when you threatened those families, you learned very quickly why humanity had clawed its way to the top of Earth's food chain, despite being relatively weak, slow, and fragile, compared to the things that hunted them. They didn't survive alone. They survived together. I watched Emma and Biscuit through my observation equipment, the girl teaching her badger to play a human game involving colored blocks while her parents worked in their laboratory. The scene was domestic, peaceful, utterly ordinary by human standards. Also absolutely terrifying if you understood the implications. Because somewhere out there, the Meridian Syndicate was learning that contracts on human families came with unexpected costs. Somewhere, military planners were updating their threat databases to include companion animals as a force multiplier. And somewhere, a new generation of hunters was hearing the story of 12 elite operatives who went after a human child and met a honey badger named Biscuit. The galaxy was learning. Slowly, painfully, through hard lessons written in the blood of those who underestimated humanity's capacity for forming lethal partnerships. But learning nonetheless. Emma looked up from her game, directly at my concealed observation post, and waved. I froze, my camouflage systems fully active, my position theoretically invisible to human sensory capabilities. She couldn't possibly see me. Could she? She went back to her blocks, and I exhaled slowly. Probably just random chance. Humans couldn't detect my stealth technology. That would be ridiculous. Biscuit, however, was staring directly at my position, his dark eyes unblinking and far too knowing for comfort. I made a note in my log about enhanced human situational awareness and decided that perhaps tomorrow I'd observe from a greater distance, much greater distance. Because if 40 cycles of studying humans had taught me anything, it was that underestimating them led to very short careers and very permanent consequences. The honey badger didn't care about your military hardware, your advanced technology, or your reputation as a galactic apex predator. It cared about the little girl who fed it dried fruit and named it after her favorite food. And that, I reflected, made it infinitely more dangerous than any weapon the galaxy had ever devised.